What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the POWLAX podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Chapla. Yeah, that'll be the intro for now. Hope everyone had a great weekend. I had a great weekend. I went to Sandstorm. I'm very excited for my travels to be over for the time being because basically we had a tournament in Del Mar, then LaxCon, then the tournament at Sandstorm, and Sandstorm was absolutely awesome. So if you were down there, I hope you guys had fun as well. But for those of you who've never tuned into the live stream / podcast before, basically this is my attempt at clarifying some of my own ideas. I essentially just kind of talk through the whole thing. I basically talk through ideas so that I can clarify them so that I know where I want to take them and how to really close them out. And so one of the things that many of the people that I watch do is they use stories from their own lives to essentially build out the life lessons that they want to build out. And I need to find those lessons. And so I'm in my third, I think this is actually the fourth story of kind of my lacrosse journey, and within the lacrosse journey, how I found the sport, I guess how the stories and the life lessons that I can teach through my own stories is what I'm trying to find. And so we found a good few of them, and we're basically going to pick up where we left off, which was I just left Mountain Vista High School coaching with Jamie Monroe, and Smoking Strings. Yes, it is available on Apple Podcasts. I need to go in and change some of the stuff though, because the whole episodes idea kind of messed with me. But yes, it's available on Apple Podcasts. You can check it out later. So before we get started, a couple quick things. We've got a couple people that we're doing affiliate marketing with because we use their products. So I kind of want to give them a shout out. And so basically, here's the idea. Anything I mention in the podcast or in anywhere, basically, if you try to put in POWLAX in their coupon code section, there might be a coupon code. It'll give you 10% off, and it also kicks back and supports the channel. So that's kind of the idea. So the first one is Pearl Lacrosse, which is made by Guardian, and they make the best ball out there. And I'm kind of not going to get into their competition or anything, but basically, if you buy those balls, you're not going to have to buy new balls for 3-4 years. We're still using balls that are 3-4 years old, and you just, I see all the people who do the ball resurfacers, and it just doesn't make sense to me. Just buy the good balls. Like, it doesn't cost that much more per ball if you get them in bulk. But so for Pearl, if you put in POWLAX when you buy them, you basically get 10% off, and it kicks me a little bit back too, so you support the channel. The next one, new one, is Flip Goalie. And so if you don't know what Flip Goalie is, essentially it is a obstacle that you put in a goal where it's 2 feet wide, and you can get multiple targets. But so it's 2 feet wide, and it has a picture of a goalie on it. And I really like it because it doesn't just isolate corners, and it doesn't give you the top and bottom. And it really teaches players how to use their overhand mechanics to go up and down the pipes. But so if you're watching on YouTube, you can use POWLAX YouTube. If you're watching on Facebook, you can use POWLAX Facebook. And as you are, if you want to get it. There's going to be a couple great things kind of coming out here soon. Hopefully a couple like commercials for that. But so those are things that I use. And so, I've kind of reached out to them and saw if we could do something, because it's funny. Everyone keeps telling me, you got to monetize what you're doing or else it's kind of not doing it. But so it's something that I'm kind of struggling with. Not really struggling with. I really like the fact that everything's free because I get a lot of comments from a lot of different places. But it's the affiliate marketing is something that if I endorse a product because I use a product, I don't really feel bad for doing that. But so Flip Goalies are awesome. It's flipgoalie.com. Pearl Lacrosse is awesome. It's pearllacrosse.com. There could be a couple more here soon too. But so there's your plug for the day, and let's get right into things. So like I mentioned a little bit before, we are picking up with me going into Grandview, but so we got a couple little things to go through first. So first, Mike from Philly, who I mentioned, who is doing his own videos at Nation 9 in Philly. If you haven't heard of that or you don't follow Mike online, make sure you follow him. But so I keep mispronouncing his last name. It's Walzak. It's how he pronounces it. But so as you guys see that, I just wanted to make sure we get that clear. The next thing, in my last podcast, I mentioned that I was going to put out a podcast with the story about Parker. that will be coming out in a little. I don't want to rush anything out about that interaction. I really want to make it something that you really feel the full force of what it is. And so I'm waiting on something from them. And then I'm going to be, really putting some time into that interaction, because it really meant a lot to me to see how much the tricks helped him through a hard time, because of how much lacrosse has kind of helped me through my rough time as well. And so I really want to just make sure that I don't rush something out for that interaction. And so that will be coming up here shortly. So now, let's see, last little thing. So I want to throw a shout out to Stelios and Jesse James West. I was in both of their LaxCon videos, so I just wanted to thank them, have a shout out to them. There will be another video that I should probably post today, since I have a little bit of time to work today. And it's going to show kind of what I feel that they bring to lacrosse, because so many people look at them. I'm basically going to tell you what's in the video right now, so you should still tune into the video. But basically, so many people look at them when they go to LaxCon, and they're so excited to see them because they've seen the vlogs, and they're like, oh man, you're famous. Like, everyone knows you. Like, they get a good 20,000 views per video, and the videos are very well produced. But what people don't really see is that they put in a ton of time behind the scenes to make those videos. Those are not easy to make. They might just be filming themselves wherever they are, but those take a ton of time, a ton of effort to kind of be sitting in their rooms on top of having a full college course load and be playing Division I and Division III lacrosse. And what I don't think people really see within that context is that people seem to think they want that because other people pay attention to them, but they kind of see it from the idea of being famous, when what they should really see it as is those two are both building their own skills to do the vlogging stuff. So as I was at the IMLCA convention, I met one of the coaches from Villanova, where Stelios plays. And as I mentioned, like, oh, do you know that guy from YouTube? He's like, oh, Stelios? Yeah, well, he's actually going to be doing some stuff for us now too. And they are building their skill work to be able to get jobs in marketing, video production, all kinds of different things once they kind of get through everything. So it's definitely a very cool thing for them to do. So, all right, how far along? We're about 8 minutes in, so it's about time to kick off the story. So, where we left off last time was basically, what's up, Amos? So, I had an experience coaching for 2 years with Jamie Monroe at Mountain Vista. The reason why I really wanted to leave Mountain Vista was because I was coaching the JV and Varsity 2 levels, and I didn't get to really experience a lot of the coaching with Coach Monroe. The thing I really learned coaching with Coach Monroe was that, first off, the way he looks at the game is on another level. Like, if you've ever seen some of his posts, he'll post like a basketball dodge, and he's like, or basketball, whatever, some dude break at someone's ankles. And the way he associates it to lacrosse is so just in depth that he's just spent 5 to 10 times as long thinking about it than I ever have. And so it's a very cool thing to kind of watch him work. But so the thing I really enjoyed about coaching alongside of him was to be able to watch him work. And when I wasn't on the same field as him during practices, I didn't feel like I was gaining as much knowledge as I could. And when the opportunity came to go to Grandview, I thought, this is real experience, real head coaching position. I'd never done anything like this before. I was a head coach at Ridgeview Academy, but that was a youth correction center. It wasn't a real kind of high school experience. But so this was just an opportunity for me to kind of step out of that. And as I did that, he wrote me a really great review, and he told me, he's like, I spent 7 years at Yale learning this craft and really learning it. And so he kind of cautioned against it. And one of the things that he said about me as I was leaving was that I really needed to hone in my ability to coach with a head coach perspective of being more of, I don't know if it's intense, but the joking buddy life doesn't work as a head coach, because as an assistant coach it does, because as the head coach essentially yells at you, you can go and hang out with the assistant coach, and he'll build out the back end of what the head coach was trying to say, but a head coach doesn't have time a lot of times to really talk each player through everything. And so that's where having that assistant coach really helps. But so I took the job at Grandview with the complete understanding that I had no idea what I was doing. So my first thing was to kind of come in, and there was some turmoil with the previous, with the previous booster club, with the other head coach who was there. And the first thing that was kind of said to me was, get rid of the whole board. And I didn't end up doing that, but we trying to create a new experience when everyone but me was coming into the experience with kind of a negative perspective was definitely something that was tough for me to kind of navigate. But so I'm going to try and do this in the best way I can as far as going through each year as well as each kind of thing that I learned. But there are some aspects to this that I haven't fully processed yet. And once we get into that, you'll completely understand kind of exactly why I haven't processed them completely. And my goal is to explain what I learned, where I screwed up, because I screwed up a lot, and kind of where it took me. But so the first thing that I'll say is that I was lucky enough to have worked with Coach Monroe, right? I kind of knew what I wanted to do on offense. I kind of knew what I wanted to do on defense. Much of this I got from him. Some of it I kind of had an understanding of prior and wanted to kind of see where my ideas would add in his ideas. And I worked my butt off at Vista doing a lot of work for free in the off season, and I kept doing that at Grandview. So one of the things that I'm extremely proud of at how I was able to do stuff at Grandview was, I would be there 5 to 6 days a week in the off season. So we started lifting. That was one of the first things we put in when we got to Grandview was lifting. And so the cool thing about Grandview is that they actually have a lift where all of the teams that are out of season come and lift for an hour after school. So the PE teachers run it. And so Nate Robinson, shout out to you. He stays after school an extra hour per day, and he builds these lifts for all of the athletes to come and lift. So you'll have girls basketball, boys lacrosse, and everyone kind of lifts as a community. And some of the kids hate it because there's so many kids in there that it doesn't create an environment that you can really get the lifts that they want you to get in. There's just not enough time, not enough room. But the community that it builds at Grandview it's one of the best things I've ever seen. Now, there's a whole other thing to say about having the ability to have a weight room completely to yourself. That is definitely something that is a cool thing to have because you build that team camaraderie and it's only your team in there. But the entire culture of Grandview has this. It's just awesome. It's just another kind of thing. But so we did lifting 5 days a week. After we'd lift, we'd do a chalk talk, or we would run the hallways, especially in the winter. In the last year, we started yoga. I really wanted to make sure that we brought that I was at as much as possible. So back then, I didn't have a son. I didn't have a fiance, and I was able to go to the school every day and not get paid and just, work with the kids and kind of just show my face and be there. And it was a blessing and a curse. Like, the work ethic was awesome, but I'm cursed in the fact that I often don't look for people who want jobs that I don't want to do. So one thing that I'm still working on 100% is I've got to work on my ability to kind of give away some of the things that I don't want. It's not that I don't want to be doing them, but I get overwhelmed because I try to do everything. And so there's the whole 80-20 principle where if someone can do something, 80% as well as you probably shouldn't be doing it. But in the same, there's also a lot to say. I was so jazzed up about my first coaching experience that I wanted it to just be, perfect. And so a couple of the things I thought were above and beyond that I do. Every year I'd build a complete playbook with Grandview stuff on it. And, you know, it would have all the clear stuff in it, the offensive transition, the defensive transition, the face-off stuff, everything in it. So essentially, if you've ever seen any of the PDFs at patreon.com/POWLAX that correspond to the videos on YouTube, those are what I built for my teams first, right? And then over time, it basically became, there's no reason I should keep these to myself. These should, you know, go everywhere. And so people seem to like them, and that's nice. But so I definitely put in a ton of extra work behind the scenes. And, you know, I got a big shout out to Wendy, my fiance. She, you know, she always supported me through all that, and she kind of was the person who really allowed me to do that. So that was great. And the other thing was I didn't have as many bills. I was able to put that time in because I was also doing all the custom mesh at that point in time. But, you know, it was a good scenario where I could really put in a ton of extra time that I probably I wouldn't choose to do it now. I could choose to do it now, but I would way rather spend a lot of that time with Turner, and I'm excited for when he's a little bit older and I can take him to it and we can do both at once. So that's great. So the other thing that I did that I really enjoyed doing at Grandview was when we would do lifts, we would do chalk talks, and the chalk talks wouldn't be about lacrosse plays. They would be about life, what the kids were struggling with. So here's a theory that I have. I feel that the first thing you have to do as a team is you kind of have to isolate everyone down to their lowest level. So at our base, at everyone's core as a human, you are just a human. Like, there's nothing special about any of us that's more than anyone else. Like, you may be doing something better, you may have a skill on top of it, but I believe that skill was most likely given to you through your work ethic and your choices, right? But at the bottom level, we all still struggle with the same things. And so once you get a Jace Baldwin said the chalk talks were fire. And so a lot of this was also me telling my mistakes that I had made prior to coaching to the players to give them an understanding that even though you screw up, you still got to keep going. And, you know, this hits kind of home now because we actually, we had a death in the family, and it was someone who chose to end their own life. And it's like, there's a level of, once you kind of give everyone the humble nature of you're just another person, it kind of lets you let the world off your shoulders. You know what I mean? And once you've taken the world off your shoulders and you don't feel that you have so much pressure on you at all times, you're able to really connect with the others on your team. But if you try to control and you have this ego about you where you think you're better than anyone else on the team, it creates this division within the team where anything that other person says to you is either, I don't have to listen to you because you're not a freshman, or because you're a freshman, or man, those upperclassmen really stink. And so one of the things we talked about at Grandview was how they really wanted to have a community where we were all together. And so anyone who came to any of the lifts or anything, came to the chalk talks, and we all had the ability to, communicate where we were in life as well as, things. And so for me, I learned this when I was at Goucher. So another kind of funny story is I got in trouble right before I went to school in Maryland. And as I went to school in Maryland, I had to take these classes with a bunch of people who had also gotten in trouble with the same things that I had. And one of the things I learned in that class was I learned to kind of just be honest and tell the experiences that I had, because one, no one was going to attack me for it. And most people really respected the idea that I was able to be vulnerable enough. And that's a lot what this is about. When we get to the end of hopefully this day, there are some things that I still, I'm trying to still process through them, that I'm still a little bit, I don't regret them. I think they actually helped me to get to the situation that I have now. But it was something that I questioned some of the decisions that I made within those times. So point being is, when you have a team, everyone has to realize that everyone's kind of striving for the same things. And once you realize that, you're able to all walk together. If it looks like some of you are ahead of the pack, some of you aren't. So one of the thing that I was trying to mention with the story about me getting in trouble and having to go to these classes was some of the times I would just share my experiences of getting in trouble with the players so that they could realize that I'm just a human too. And because they're just humans too, and they're going to screw up, they're going to make mistakes. But the key is that you be honest throughout it, and that, you're able to, just because you make a bad decision, it doesn't make you a bad person. Now, if you just continue to lie and you continue to try and get out of everything, and you don't, kind of see where the consequences will kind of take you, you essentially build this narcissistic principle where you don't care what anyone else thinks, and then you basically ostracize yourself from the rest of people. But so that's something that we really did a lot to get rid of once we were there. What up, Ty? But so at Grandview, we really built that community very, very well through a lot of the chalk talks and through a lot of the lifts. The other thing is, because we had so many kids working so hard in the off season, when we got to the spring season, there was a lot of, community. Like, everyone had been putting work in, and I'm super excited about CT now because we're putting in a ton of work in the off season too. And it's really helping us, get through that. We have a lot of work to do, but it's something that's really helped. So one of the things that really helped with, one of the surprises that I had with being a head coach of a team was really feeling out what matters to everyone. And so there's a couple, I've kind of written them down. But so first off, playing time matters, right? Kids care, they care tons. And, a lot of kids don't realize when they're not working as hard as others, or maybe they are working as hard as others, but they're just not as physically talented. They weren't given, God's gift of athleticism, and therefore they can't play as well as somebody else, and then they don't get to play. But playing time matters. And so it's something that if you don't have the right perception, you are going to get bitter about. And that's something that doesn't sit well with me, because I feel that if you are going to get bitter over the fact that you're not playing because someone else made a decision that, someone else is better than you, you need to have that conversation with that person and kind of see where it is and kind of what's going on. But a coach's decision, like, it's as if some people think that coaches want to play the people they like instead of the players who are best because they want to put out a worse product. And so there's a lot of judgment that goes to coaches about like who's playing and where they're playing and yada yada, when there should be a pretty good trust that the coach wants to put out the best product because that's his product, right? So we're going to kind of get into, some more of these kind of these things. But so the next thing I learned, and this is something that really, it's basically perception is reality. And I think that's completely true, that perception is definitely reality. And for my perception, if your reality sucks, alter your perception. Don't say reality sucks. Like, so there's this story. It's called The Cocktail. Well, it's like The Cocktail Hour by T.S. Eliot. And in this story, a woman goes to a cocktail party and talks to a psychiatrist. And as she's talking to the psychiatrist, she says, I'm really having a terrible time. I really just hope that the problem is something with me. And the psychiatrist kind of goes, wait, what do you mean? Like, why do you hope that it's you? And she's like, well, I'm not going to change the world. So I hope that it's me, and if I can change something about me, that it'll allow me to progress. And that's the perfect way of thinking about the world. If you're going to blame the world for all of your problems and what's not happening for you, there's no way you can impact that, and you're just going to bury yourself in a hole and you're not going to get any better. And so I really like that story because, it really solidifies those principles of, if you're not finding the reality that you want, maybe your perception is wrong. So let's say you're someone who's on the bench and you're not getting as much playing time. Your perception should be about being the best teammate you possibly can, especially in practice, especially in weights, because you're going to do the same thing anyway. If you want playing time, your ability to be the best player you can in practice and the best teammate you can in practice is going to do a few things. So first, let's say you throw a good pass, someone catches it and shoots it. You don't think the coach saw it. Your first thing should be to go up to that player who scored the goal and, congratulate them and make sure you create that chemistry, because the more you create that chemistry with your teammates, the more often they're going to throw the ball to you and the more it's going to build up your status on the team. The next thing is, if you are on the bench, your thought should be, how can I contribute to the team in this moment, even though I'm not in the game, because you have such a huge part of what things are. Like, kids think that just because they don't step on the field that they don't have a humongous impact on the game. But I guarantee you, if you think about a team who, has people on the bench who are complaining, moaning, and doing all this stuff, like, you are, ships sink with tiny holes. Like, tiny holes sink ships. And that one person who's moaning and complaining about every little thing and, really hates everything, they can sink an entire team. And that perception, that negative idea can go all the way through a team and totally tank a team. So it's very important that you modify your perception. It's not the other way around. You inherently have a perception that you broadcast to the world and you will see back on it, right? And so regardless of where you are in those situations, your ability to put your best foot forward is what matters. We don't judge ourselves based on whether we win or lose a game. We judge ourselves based on whether we performed to the best of our ability. So like last night, we beat a team 5-4 and we played terribly. We played the worst box game we've played all year, and everyone was excited that we won. And it was like, I want to say we had like literally 15 minutes of penalty time. And that's probably under what we actually had. But so we did not play the best game we could have. And everyone celebrating a win, when you win like that, it's not a win. It's, you didn't play to the best of your ability. But so the next thing at Grandview that we did that, looking back on it might not have been the best idea, but within that time frame, there were some new things that happened. So first off is, within the time I was at Grandview, they instituted an RPI. So before, coaches would basically choose the top 16 teams that would go in, and so go into the playoffs. And now there's a 4A, 5A, so it's 16 per group. And the reason why that worked really well is the same reason that it's hard to know what each team should do. Like, so with all my coaching content, I don't know if your team is like the Tommy Knockers 2026 team and is playing for a national championship every year because they're that good, or if it's a JV team with kids who can't throw and catch. And so for that same reason, there's just some teams might have great records because they're playing against really bad teams and they shouldn't make the playoffs, but the other team who's playing very good teams should make the playoffs even though their record is worse. So when they went to that RPI, it created some issues, and now as coaches are trying to schedule, they're scheduling based on what it's going to do for their RPI. So one of the things that we did at Grandview was the first year we had a relatively easy schedule. And within that first year, we did great. We made the playoffs. We lost, I think, in the first round to Kent, but we were like, I want to say our final record was like 12-3 to end the regular season. Our losses were to Creek, Arapahoe, and who was it? I'm not sure. But either way, we had a really great record. And, we made the playoffs, but we didn't play that good of teams. But so the next year we played better teams and we added a few teams that were better. And I don't think we got as good of a record, but, we still did well. And that was the year we made it to the quarterfinals, and we did lose to Creek, but we beat Columbine, a team that we had lost to previously. And Columbine was one of the teams that we added, and they're traditionally very, very good. And they're going to be really good this year because I'm pretty sure that's where Berkman went. It's either there or Highlands Ranch, one of the two. But so it's definitely something where, because of how the players at Grandview, those first 2 years were like, we had some real good firepower, but we kept stepping up the level of the teams that we'd play. So even though our records got worse, our team got better. And so just so I make sure I hit a bunch of stuff within this before I get on to our, kind of the more so the things that I learned from it being at Grandview. So a couple things. First off, parents set the tone of the culture. If you have parents that are in the stands yelling and screaming all of the time, your culture is going to be of that way. And so I've called timeouts before and walked across the field to tell parents to stop talking and to stop yelling because they don't know what they're talking about. And so my first year at Grandview, I had a player who got just cleaned out by a terrible hit in a fall ball game. And I ran onto the field, and the dad was like, animated, like, what the, his kid just got destroyed. And I totally understood that, but I was like, you got to wait, right? And then he actually came and apologized the next day because we were doing some like one-on-one coaches and players things. And he was like, sorry about that. And it's totally understandable. And the key is that he had that understanding. But so if your parents are whining about stuff in the stands, that's another little hole in your boat and you're going to sink. And so we're going to get into some stuff on kind of why my boat at Grandview kind of started sinking, but we'll get there in a minute. So let's see. The framework that we kind of used was, best player's going to play. Also another kind of cool thing I thought that was kind of cool that I don't think I would do again, but everyone got one reversible. So when you joined the program, you got your reversible and it was going to last you all 4 years. I didn't really believe in the idea of getting swag every single year. Now I kind of think you should because it's nice to have multiple shirts you can wear to support the program through time. But it was something where I don't need parents to pay an extra $100 every single year for a new uniform when they can just have one that has the same number on it all 4 years. Like, I just don't think you need to buy it. And so the reason I did that was so that people would use that extra $100 to play box for, have box practices. And that was what we did with it. And so it really worked well. The other things that we did in there was, that I'm pretty proud of is we got 6 of the all ball pro bounce backs that are essentially chained together on the field up there. And that was something that was great because everyone wants a wall, but a wall is hard. You have to go through the district. You have to go through all these things. And, Cherry Creek schools, I think they've already done it, but I don't know because I've only been to CT, but everyone's getting their own turf field. And so we didn't really get a wall because we went through a lot of the process to get a wall, but never kind of got the wall because they didn't know if they wanted to put the new turf field in the place for the wall. But so it was just something we worked towards. And so we got 6 of those really big all ball pros with Grandview stuff on them. And those are great. And so that was a cool thing that we kind of brought. The next thing that we did at Grandview that I really thought was good was a substance abuse policy, which was 0 tolerance, none. Right. And so where other coaches at the school would basically kind of say to me, don't make your policy too stringent because if that one kid screws up, you might want that kid to play. I was like, I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. And so a certain individual was the first, and I think only person who I ever had to have that talk with, but they lost their privileges to play for that year because they were caught smoking during school. I mean, and it was like, you didn't have to do that. And so that was where we really kind of built that culture. And so I really think that if you set high expectations, it will really allow players to rise up through those expectations versus them kind of thinking that they're not going to have, it really creates an environment where players can thrive versus something where they're not going to enjoy it. So that's something that took me a while. And that was what Coach Monroe was telling me when I went to Grandview was, you can't be buddy with the kids if you're going to coach them well. You have to have high expectations. You can't, allow all of this and that. So next thing I learned at Grandview was, I don't know if I'll get into the other part. We'll kind of go through a couple other things real quick. But so cut players. Make sure you cut. I don't care where you are. I don't care what thing it is. Make sure you cut, but do it on the right principles. cut players who you know are going to, if they're not going to contribute to the team because you're at that varsity level and you are competitive and you know that they're going to become poison on the sideline, you have to cut them. That was the biggest mistake I made in my final year. One of the biggest mistakes I made in my final year, because I knew a kid wasn't going to play, but he worked his butt off. And so I'll get into that story in a second, because that's the real story that I haven't quite processed yet. But you have to cut players. It's not worth it having players who are going to quit mid-season because they didn't understand where their position was on the team. And so at Vista the first year, I remember we had a goalie, a really good freshman goalie, and the senior goalie was upset because the freshman goalie was going to get all the starts this year because he was that good. That's who he was. But when those two kids quit because they realized what was happening, the other players on the team were like, no, that's a good thing that they quit, because now they're not going to bring that toxicity to the team. So it's important to understand that. Now, I didn't think that a specific player was going to bring that toxic nature. And so I figured he would still put in just as good of work as he always had, but it was actually just I feel that I should be playing, not this other player who is definitely a better player than he was. But so we'll get into that in a minute. So another really cool thing, two stories about games that were amazing. The first game that was amazing was when we beat Mullen the very first year. We went to overtime with Mullen, hadn't beaten Mullen for years and years and years, and we beat them in overtime. Ben Warren scored the goal. It was unbelievable. Great experience. You know, it really brought everybody together. So then second year, when we went to the quarterfinals, that was a good year too. And I'm pretty sure this was the first year was the year we went to Aspen. So when we went to Aspen, the first year I was at Grandview, we were down 7 in the fourth quarter. And I called timeout. I think it might have been halftime, one of the two. So we're down by 7. And I was just like, dude, look around. Look where you are. You know, we're in the middle of this beautiful mountain town, in the middle of the mountains. Have fun, you know? And then they turned it on, and we ended up winning by like 3 or 4. And it was just, there was a level of freedom that it allowed. If you're just enjoying the game, you have a freedom to kind of go play. And that's what we really want to give to kids. That was another one of the mistakes that I made in that final year. But so now let's go through. So then in the third year, okay, and so the whole idea of making the playoffs at Grandview was huge, because when I got there, they hadn't been to the playoffs for like 8 years. And so I think that the last time they had been to the playoffs was in a year where there were 32 teams and there was only one division in Colorado, in the same way that when I was a junior at Smoky, we did not make the playoffs, but then when they brought into the field, we did make the playoffs. So it wasn't really like we'd gone farther with that team than like Tomlinson and McDonald's group. It was just the fact that, you know, they had more teams. They let in more teams. Now, okay, so let's see. So the second year, so the first year we made the playoffs, lost to Kent. Second year we made the playoffs, beat Columbine in the first round, made the very first quarterfinals ever, and then lost to Creek in the next round. Third year, made the playoffs, and then I believe we lost, I don't remember exactly who we lost to that year. But so then we'll kind of get into kind of 2018 and then my exit from Grandview. So 2018 was a tough year. Oh, the last little note I have is, and we kind of talked about it already, is never promise anyone that they're going to play, ever. Everyone has to make a decision, and even if it's like, you know, we're playing against a team that's not as good, never promise they're going to play, ever. Just because in the moment, you never know what's going to happen, and if they don't have the expectation, they won't be let down by that expectation. And so I think it's extremely important that not only do you set high expectations, but you don't pigeonhole yourself into making decisions into things that you can't make, because then you're a liar. You know what I mean? Like, and the hard part about the future is that you never know what's coming, right? So I might be able to say right now, you know, like, okay, so I made a promise to CT that I would be at the games when I was not traveling on Saturdays, okay? But I can't make the games this weekend because of a kind of a tragic thing that happened within our family. And so it's, you know, that's a different scenario, but I'm still not upholding what I thought I would with CT for the games. Now, everyone kind of acknowledges that when there's a death, that's kind of what happens. But in the same sense, you definitely want to make sure you do that. But so at Grandview, in 2018, this was definitely a tough year. And so one of the things that we did, so I read a book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And essentially, one of the things that this book builds is it builds the idea that everyone who is interacting with a group, they're at fault for every part of what that is. So within it, essentially, Jocko Willink and his, I don't really know what you'd call it, his group are in Ramadi. And they're in Ramadi and, they do some friendly fire and they kill some Iraqi soldiers who they were working with. And then the commander comes down and he's like, I need a report on this. And as Jocko makes the report, he kind of asks his team, whose fault was it? And the guy on the radio, he's like, I could have radioed quicker. We didn't radio their movement. We didn't radio their movement. It's my fault. And then another guy says, I pulled the trigger. It was my fault. Like, it was my job. And he's like, no, it wasn't your fault. And then another person goes, then Jocko says, no, it's my fault. I'm the commander. I'm the person who's in charge of all of this. It's my fault. And so that's actually something we've put in with the Scorpions, guys. It's like, whose fault? My fault. So that as they're going in and as we get scored on, everyone thinks about what they could have done better. And the way I described it last night was even those players who are on the bench, if they're not putting their full effort in practice because they know they're not going to get playing time, they are, first off, if they're not living to their expectation of what they should bring, they're shortchanging themselves. But also, if, say, a junior defenseman doesn't play as hard as he would against a senior attackman because he's playing against a sophomore attackman, he is shortchanging the sophomore attackman because he's not preparing him as well as he could. And so even though that sophomore attackman caught the ball, tried to dodge, and missed in the game, he also, that could be his fault because he didn't prepare that. It's like the Rudy principle where he pushes the dude in the parking lot and he's like, I'm a defenseman for Purdue. The offensive lineman's pissed. He's like, stop killing yourself for the team. You're never going to play. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm preparing you. And so that's something that I feel that players who aren't getting the playing time that they should get need to rely on. And they need to have that understanding that they are contributing to the team, because if they really embrace the idea that they're not contributing, they're just going to build poison in themselves and they're going to poison the team. So the key is that you understand that you are at fault for what happens. And so as I tell the rest of this story, I'm hoping that will come out of what the story is, because all in all, the things I'm about to tell you are definitely my fault. They're something that, Jordan Peterson says that if you have a memory that's over 18 months old and you still have an emotional reaction to it, it means you haven't processed it. And so at a level, I still cringe at some of my decisions that I made during this time, but I'm over it in a sense, but I still am kind of like, I kind of wish that went the other way. Like, what would have happened if I would have made this decision differently? So first thing, so let me just outline kind of what's going on in my life during this time. So Wendy and I, at this point in time, were doing IVF. For people who don't know who IVF is, it's in vitro fertilization, because we were trying to have our son Turner. Luckily, it worked. And, I know people who have tried 3-4 times to do this. And so we refinanced our house. Like, we put everything into having a kid. And luckily it worked. But so within this time frame, that was a lot of tension, a lot of stress. And, everything meant more during this time. Now, funny thing about this time was that literally the day we found out that we were pregnant, and we couldn't tell anyone for another 2 months, right? Literally the day we found out, after going through all of this stuff, after spending $50,000 on all this stuff, the day we find out from the doctors, I get a call from my brother and he says that his wife is pregnant. And so it was just a really funny thing. So now Turner's cousin, Jacob, they're the same age. And so it's a very cool thing to watch them grow up. It's way cool. So another thing about Grandview that had happened through the years was the first year the first 2 years I was at Grandview, I had an athletic director named Jamie Ulitsky. She was the best athletic director I've ever had. She was very supportive. She'd done it for a while, and she's just an all-around great person. Now, she moved up to vice principal, and we got a new person in. Then the next year, that person left, and we got another new person in. So in the final year, I had a brand new athletic director after having another athletic director who didn't do as good as he could have, and so we got a new athletic director in. So within this final year, we have this new athletic director. And one of the things that we talked about before the season started was, along with the whole cutting idea to kind of get rid of that poison from the team, was he said, if you're going to cut anyone, make sure you have that conversation on the fields during tryouts. And if you don't know how tryouts work, basically, you're not allowed to set anything for the team before the first day of practice that starts for that team. Now, you can have tryouts for as many days as you need. I think we did 3 days, or we might have done 1 day. I'm not sure. But even if you've evaluated through the fall or through previous years or through the winter, you still have to have that tryout day. You have to let everyone try out. And the best thing to do, and one of the coolest things to do if you have the ability to, is to have seniors who aren't going to play on the JV, because they at least get to play. Like I'm very much so the person who wants to bring as many people to play as possible, but if there's someone who's going to be that poison, they can't come with. But so I'm having these conversations. I had to have 2 of those conversations. I ended up cutting 1 player, and I had my ideal of 28 players, and it's however many attackmen, middies, defensemen, goalies, face-off, all of that. And I have a conversation with the player, and the conversation essentially is, I have 28 spots. I'm adding another one for you, and I just want you to know that your work ethic and your attitude have been what have really solidified it, but just understand that there are X amount of people in front of you, but that I want you on the team because you bring a lot to the team. And as I had that conversation, that instilled something in his head. That perception was, the team is here, I'm here. Not that I'm so valuable to the team that even though I'm not going to play, coach wants me as a part of this team. And so there was a huge misconception in that first thing, but I was following the directive of my athletic director. Later in the year, I'm called in to, so our first 4 games that year, we played Columbine, made the semifinals. Kent, I think, lost in the state championship. Arapahoe made the semifinals. Highlands Ranch, they might have made the semifinals too. One of those I'm wrong on, because I think Creek was in there too. Or maybe, I'm not sure. Either way, all these teams were excellent teams. Those were our first 4 games. Because like I was saying earlier, we played better teams every time we went. Every year. And now, as we played those teams, the first 4 games, we just get beat. We just weren't as good a team. We're a very young team this year. Our best players were sophomores this year. And so, we then won 2 in Utah. We dropped a close one to CA, and then we won 4 straight. So at the end of the year, we ended up being 7-7. But so while all this is going on, the player who I had the discussion with and kept him on board, his parents saw him not playing when the starters were taken out and essentially got pissed and started talking a bunch of stuff on the side. And this happened to be a player that I had a great relationship with that played for me during the summer, and under all circumstances, you would say would probably have preferential treatment based on the fact that he continuously played with me for all of this time, right? And these set of parents had connections to the AD through past kids. And I was tasked by my AD with having a meeting with my AD and this player's parents without the player there. And if you're a coach, you know that is, there's no reason to have the conversation without the kid there, right? And so I was given you should ask him about what he thinks during practice. And so I did. And so as I talked to him, I'm like, hey man, I don't feel like we have a bad relationship. I think we've been pretty good. And he's like, yeah, no, we have. And I'm like, so is it a playing time issue? And he's like, yeah, it is a playing time issue. And at that point, I'm like, okay, well, that was how kind of the poison got in, especially during this time, because during this time I was looking at this athletic director and saying, how are you going to have me meet with this kid's parents when it's supposed to be, we're supposed to be building up this kid's character and his ability to handle things for himself. And parents aren't supposed to have that ability to, we can talk about why your kid's not playing, and do the whole 24-hour rule or whatever like that. But I basically walked into kind of an ambush, right? There was nothing I could say that was, I think this player's better and I think he should be playing. It was all, you're treating my kid unfairly. When I talk to the kid, it's, we have a good relationship. I'm not being treated unfairly. It's just that I want to play. And then, but with the parents, they think I'm treating this kid unfairly. And so that put a lot of animosity in me, right? Like, I did not feel that that was a justified thing to have to do for a coaching situation. And someone who said they had my back, my athletic director here, he completely violated any trust I had there, because I was an outsider to him because I didn't have a relationship with him. This was his first year. Any trouble he was having was directly my fault, not his fault. And, it just didn't create a good thing. But so within all of this and all the IVF, all the stuff from all of that, like, my head was not in the greatest place. And so another thing that I was doing is, like, our team was not performing like it should have. I was overcoaching. I created another playbook and all this stuff where everything was kind of mapped out. It was a Denver style, where they're very methodical. They bring it out, we're going to dodge, we're going to draw this slide, and we're going to attack in this way. And it really wasn't a good thing for how we were playing. Like, we couldn't play freely. And so we really weren't performing as well as we could have. We also had the person who I thought was our best attackman missed the first 3 games, and yada yada. Either way, it was kind of a murderer's row of situations that put a lot of stress. And then I heard from one of our assistant coaches, everyone's thinking about a mutiny because we weren't playing well, and things were definitely. It was a very tough situation for me for this, but so I'd put in all of this work. I thought it was pretty good, but so. The thing that we kind of talked about before was the whole idea of perception is reality, right? If your reality isn't that good, I think that it's about your perception more than it is about kind of what's happening. And so one of the things I heard in this meeting with the AD and this kid's parents was that, perception is reality, but there was no tussle and kind of like attempting to get back. And whenever I talked to the player about it, it was all just about playing time. But so that was something that happened. And now we're kind of going to get into kind of my exit. So in the middle of this, for everyone who is watching on Instagram, I'm going to have to shut off the live and then I'll make it go right again. So if you want to watch on YouTube, it's all on YouTube now too. So you can also catch it there. I kind of like the view from YouTube a little better, but it is what it is. So as stated, we get to the end of the year, we're 7-7, and we're going to play Monarch. And so through the end of the year, we had a player who was ineligible for 3 weeks. This player knew they were ineligible. They did not play for 3 weeks. And then on the Wednesday before our last game, we played Chaparral. And games with Chaparral and Grandview are always really close. This game we got beat. But so before the game, this player who was ineligible thought he could play. And so I pull him down. He's like, I think I can play. I think we're good. And the athletic director, even came all the way down to the fields because he was at the stadium with us and clarified for this kid in person that he was ineligible. Now, flash forward 3 days to the future, we're 7-7. If we win, we make the playoffs. If we lose, we're out of the playoffs. As we're getting ready to play this game, we were at an away stadium, so we didn't have like a stadium. We just basically got ready on the sidelines and started warming up. I missed a player getting ready, this player who was ineligible, when I should have seen him. Now, within the context of this day, there were many times when my head just wasn't right. I'm thinking in pregame, I'm thinking if we win, we make the playoffs. I get to keep my perfect record of being a head coach and making the playoffs every year. I'm all in my head this whole time, and I missed what I needed to see, right? And so as the players were getting dressed, I should have saw this player and I should have been like, no, why are you getting dressed? You can't play, right? Of course you can't play. So then we start warming up and we're in our drills and we're playing live and I see the player and I'm like, I got to make sure I remember. I didn't want to stop everything we were doing and like call him out and like, essentially bring a negative attribute to this day because it was such an important day. And then I put it in my head. I'm like, okay, you got to make sure you tell him he needs to get undressed and let that be it. Right. And I forget about it. Totally my fault. I should have called him out right then and been like, go get undressed. So then the game starts. And through all this, just realize this is totally my fault. And this is we're going to go through some of the things that kind of happened after that were its own thing. But so as we're playing, this player happened to be an LSM. He was our second LSM for the most of the year and then obviously dropped to the third because he couldn't play. And then in the second period, I think it might have been the first. Either way, it was probably the first because our goalie was here. He runs onto the field and I see him. And I'm like, oh no. And so then he plays for 1:06, comes off the field, and I yell at him on the sideline. What are you doing? How could you do that? You knew you weren't eligible. You know the eligibility starts on Monday. And I was so pissed. So we play the game. We win by 1. So we win to go to the playoffs. We win by 1 to go to the playoffs. I think we had a nice little comeback, had a couple great goals. It was unbelievable. It was a great game. We win by 1. And I'm like, thinking in my head, maybe no one will know. Maybe no one will know. I talked to my assistant coach at the time, and as it happened, I'm like, I can't believe we went on the field. But as all this happened, it was just so... it was such it's bringing out the visceral nature of what it was because it was so dumb. It was so not what I should have been doing, and I should have had my head on straight, and I should have had all this thing. But so, hopefully no one noticed. We get the film the next day, and I watch the film, and I see it, and I'm like, I can't not say something, right? Like he went on the field. He played. He was a part of the play. Now, he only played for 1:06. He never touched the ball. He played against the ball one time, and he never, ever, he never had the ball. So the next day, Wendy and I are driving up to Glenwood Springs to see my grandmother to tell her that we're pregnant. And this is her first great-grandchild. And as we're on the drive, I'm just, I'm feeling this visceral, I'm feeling it now too. Just this heart pounding visceral nature of what you have to do. Right. And as all of this happened, Wendy and I are talking and she's like, you have to call, you have to call. And so I call our athletic director and I tell him. And he ripped me a new one. And Wendy felt so bad because she thought that me having the integrity to call and to say, hey, we had an eligible player. We won, but we have to forfeit. And now we're not going to make the playoffs. And now as we don't make the playoffs, it's like a complete and utter, it threw my entire world into a total spin. And so I get screamed at in the car as we're driving up to my grandmother's house. And, we end the phone call and, I get this, you need to do X, Y, Z. And Wendy looks at me and she's like, I'm sorry. I didn't think he would react like that. And so after the phone call, after getting chewed out, after having all of this stuff, I felt better. I had taken care of what I needed to take care of. I screwed up. I allowed a player who was ineligible to play, and I came forward, even though playoffs were on the line. Our perfect playoff thing was on the line. Everything was on the line. It was my fault. I owned up for it. That was what it was. So Instagram, this is about to kick us off. I'm going to start the live right over again. I'm just going to end it now, and then we'll start it up again. All right, so pause. We're going to get them back on. Share the story. So now, let's see. Got to go there, live. And now we're back. Okay. So hopefully everyone else can kind of come back in. So we go up to, this was hilarious. So we go up to tell my grandmother that we're pregnant, my grandmother, so with her first great-grandchild. And as we're doing it, we did it in the best way ever. So we bought these bracelets that had great-grandmother on it. And so she opens it, and she did the cutest thing ever. She literally did the cutest thing I've ever seen. She goes, well, what does it say? Or we say, what does it say? And she's like, great-grandmother. And she's like, yes, I am a wonderful grandmother. And we were like, no, like it means, we're pregnant. And so it was just the cutest thing ever. But so here's what ends up happening. So the athletic director basically informs me that the entire thing is about protecting this kid, which I fully understand. I think that the players kind of had an understanding of, I think the players had an understanding that it was a mistake and that, they weren't going to attack this player because of it. But so we had a meeting on the fields, and so another thing that happened during this year was we started reading, what was it called? Extreme Ownership, like I had mentioned, but we were going to read it as a team and use the principles within the book for the team. But as we started to do it, everyone started complaining. So I decided that we wouldn't read this book because everyone was so overwhelmed with their, with all of their, with all their schoolwork and all the other stuff. It just something that they were just overwhelmed with. And so we weren't going to sit there and listen to the book and then talk about it and yada, yada, which we should have done, because then as we're on the field and we're kind of meeting, talking about the fact that we had to forfeit, didn't make the playoffs, and now we're not going to play in the playoffs. That was one of the things that the athletic director said. And so as we're talking through this whole thing, this was my instructions. My instructions were to protect the kid, was to protect the player, right? Make sure that there's something else there, protect the player, yada, yada. It was my mistake. Don't get me wrong. It was definitely my mistake. And but that was the whole MO. And so I go in and I meet with the athletic director. He's like, how do you think the season went? And I'm like, well, I thought we played relatively well. Like losing those first 4 games kind of put us into a tailspin, which is why I get why you play teams early. That was definitely one of the mistakes that I had made. And there's definitely a level of, just frustration I feel towards myself in that moment because, either way, like I had, like, you seize the opportunity when you have it, and I should have. But so I got to finish the whole story, and then we'll kind of go to my, silver lining aspects of it. So the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks were hell for me. I had totally let my team down 100%. We weren't going to make the playoffs. It ruined the perfect 4-year record for a bunch of our players in making the playoffs, which wasn't a good thing. And every time we do our banquet, we always do our banquet after the state championship game, because it doesn't make sense to do it beforehand. You're not going to have a banquet and then play in the state championship game. If you have any intention if you tell your kids, hey, our goal is to win the state championship, but then you put a banquet before it, you're kind of like saying, I really don't believe you can do it. So it was always a point. Like, our banquet is definitely always going to be after the state championship game. So I had 2.5 weeks to sit on this at home, doing my thing, trying to build content and do all this stuff. And it was miserable. It was completely miserable. And then we had our banquet. I was very solemn. I was very, not there. But I had this thing like, okay, you screwed up. You're going to be able to make it better. Everything's going to be cool. Like, at least you did the right thing. At least you had the integrity to call them and to tell them, hey, we need to forfeit, even though everything rode on it. That's at least the part that I cling to now. At least I had that ability to even though I felt so viscerally bad about it, and you do what's right because it's right, not because it's comfortable. And so we have our banquet, kind of miserable, didn't really say much about certain kids and yada yada. It definitely wasn't the best experience. And then the day after the banquet, I get called into the athletic director's office. And I'm thinking, we're looking towards next year, hey, at least you did the right thing, da-da-da-da. And he says, we're going to fire you, or you have to resign, or you can resign. Basically, if you want to work with us and you ever want a good recommendation from me, you can resign. But if not, we're just going to fire you, and we're kind of just going to wipe our hands with it. So I was like, I basically said, what? It didn't make sense in my head. I did the right thing. I did what I should do. I came forward. I was honest. Like, I did exactly what I should do. I was honest about it. I came forward. We forfeited. It sucked. It was awful. I waited 2.5 weeks. We had our banquet. And it was like, the thing that got me about this situation is because they told me after the banquet, I wasn't allowed to, I've proven my integrity, right? By coming forward. But then they think I'm going to trash the program or trash this kid because of whatever. And it's like, I would never do that. It would never be something where that would happen. And so the fact that I was then fired because of this was kind of like, or fired or had to resign because of this was kind of like, why didn't you tell me beforehand? I'm not going to trash anyone at the banquet. At least then I could say goodbye. And so it's funny because there's this whole silver lining to this whole thing too that I kind of made up in the moment because I'm like, what am I going to tell people? How am I going to email this? And the thing that really helped me was we had just conceived a child. My whole life was going to change. I didn't know if I'd be able to coach a high school team and raise an infant, so it was kind of a blessing in disguise, but it still gives me that feeling of, that visceral feeling of dread, because it's it didn't have to happen in that way. And with all of the connections and everything that I had built at Grandview and going there 6 days a week and, in the off season and kind of building it. And my head definitely got astray. Maybe it was the perfect time for me to kind of step away and reorganize and rethink. And that this was the only way that I was going to do it, was by screwing this up and then being, forced to resign. So I wrote this letter to the parents that was I'm making the decision to resign, which I never would have done having not been given that ultimatum of, we're going to fire you or you can resign. But I had the perfect out. I'm going to have a kid. And so I said, I'm going to resign because I'm going to have a kid and I'm not going to have the time to do it in the way that I would. And that's, it's true in a sense. It is true in a sense that I was going to resign because I'm starting a family. But I never would have done that without that occurrence, right? So it's kind of I don't know if it was God telling me, hey, the only way I can show you that you need to not be the head coach at Grandview is to essentially show you that you still screw up and make it so it's impossible, or not. But there's definitely the silver lining to then being an assistant at CT last year while my son was born, and and to be able to fulfill that role. And it really is the only part that really gets me now, is I almost wish that I had forced them to fire me, because at least then they could have seen, because at least then the story is, he came forward at least and then was fired. Because I screwed up. I get it. If that's where the line is, and it's I should have told every coach, because I remember talking to my assistant coaches, guys who I trust with everything. And he's like, I had no idea that he was ineligible. And that's on me. There were so many people who could have prevented this from happening, but that one's on me. And I own that. And I think that that's important that I own it. And I owned it the next day. And I feel a lot of pride, because if say I had not come forward and I had not told them that an ineligible player had played, I would be worried now, still coaching at Grandview, that someone would pull that tape and say, during this time, this player was ineligible. And then you're a cheater. Then I'm a cheater. You know what I mean? Then I didn't just make a mistake. Then I made a mistake and I tried to cover it up. And that's something that I would never want to live with, right? Like, and as I look back on it, the thing that, so there are things that get me that I'm kind of like, I wish that would have gone the other way. First is, if it's something as important as forfeiting a game, it doesn't matter if the kid's going to be embarrassed before the game that you call him out. So just say it and just do it, and just make sure that you say exactly what you mean, right? And just say, hey, get off the field. Like, you're ineligible, man. Like, come on. What are you doing? It doesn't have to be a bad thing. And then also, it's in that same, and then it's, I wish that I had gotten the chance to tell everyone the real, I wasn't going to say anything about kind of the experience. Like, I would have said my whole resigning piece anyway, but because I was never given the opportunity to tell everyone in person that I was leaving, I was very bitter about that, because I really, really, the thing that really hurt about it was I had built all these relationships with all of these people, and in a banquet scenario, I looked like hell. I wasn't myself. I wasn't animated. I wasn't my usual self. I wasn't congratulating people with this like big heart full of gratitude that I usually was. I was still somber about the fact that I had robbed these kids of their ability to go to the playoffs, because I was so in my head that I didn't just make a call and essentially, when I noticed the player was dressed, told him not to play. That's all on me, and I felt all that. But the fact that I wasn't able to then tell everyone in the community, hey, I'm leaving. Thank you for a great time. Thank you for working your butts off for me. Thank you for all of this stuff. That's the part that really got to me, and as far as the player, he made a mistake, man. Like, he's not my issue. My issue is me. And I failed in that scenario. And I even remember talking to him the day after when we were on the fields talking with all the players, and we were all given a chance to kind of talk from the athletic director. And I remember walking up to him being like, hey man, like, we're good. No hard feelings. It is what it is. You probably saved me. You probably allowed me to be a better father to my son in his first 6 months of life, because I never would have quit the position. And so that's kind of how I look at it now. I think that it's actually kind of a better thing that it had happened. But it is something that, like, I had put so much work into being the head coach at Grandview that when then I made a mistake that eliminated that possibility of continuing to build the program, because you hear about all the great, great coaches, right? They stay at these programs for years and years and years, and they amass 600 wins because they build, and there was so much that I had built, and then I was just, plucked off the top like it was nothing, right? Because I'd screwed up. But so that's something that for me, I definitely hold that integrity of calling, taking the tongue lashing, and doing the right thing very seriously. And I'm very happy that I did that. And I think that communicating through this and kind of like telling the story definitely gave me that visceral feeling of like, what it is. But I think that it also is very cathartic in the fact that now I can kind of let it rest a bit more than I had. Like, it was not the best situation. It was not the best year. I felt that I was, kind of manipulated into having that meeting with some other parents and the athletic director without the kid there, because then there's no actual one-on-one interaction. So when I'm talking, like, there was just a bunch of things that kind of violated my ideal principles of how a community in a school should interact with the athletic director, the coach, the players, and the parents. I felt like there were some things that were kind of violated there that messed with my head. And then, through the whole, essentially resigning, getting fired thing, it was really the fact that I couldn't, like, I wrote this email that basically said, I'm going to have a kid, so I'm going to resign. And it felt cheap because it wasn't true. It wasn't the truth. The truth was I screwed up. And I think that might have been in it, and I might have apologized in it. But the truth was I screwed up, and the people in charge made the decision to let me go. And that was their decision. And it is what it is. But I still miss the fact that I wasn't able to tell everyone in person that I was leaving, because there were so many relationships. I just never got that time to say goodbye, if that makes sense. I never got the time to say, hey, with some people I did, because they still play, club, and, I got to actually have those interactions. But it was definitely something where sometimes it still feels like there's something missing because I didn't get that chance. And so it's funny because I think about it now, and I think about, not going to the CT game this weekend because of a death in the family. And it's like, I have this vision of my life that I'm going to be able to provide the lacrosse community with so much awesome stuff through all my videos and through everything. And I'm actually getting to see the kind of the fruits of my labor, not monetarily, but in how much people thank me for it. And I see my future, and I see my app coming to fruition, and I see so many people utilizing what I do, and then I realize that it could all be gone tomorrow, like that. So I do this thing. It's kind of weird. You know how you kind of have, what do you call it? It's not like ticks, but it's like, whenever you go through a yellow light, people like to kind of like touch. I do the same thing. But so what I've been doing is, you kind of just like tap. And I do 3 taps. I do one for me, one for Wendy, one for Turner. And I think when I do that a lot, it allows me to let the negative thought I just had kind of leave. And so I think that when I look at where I hope my life goes, I know I'm going to put in the effort, and I know I'm going to put in the work. And what this having to go to this memorial on Saturday is kind of helping to remind me of, is that you don't get that, right? Like, I feel a loss because I wasn't able to say goodbye to the people at Grandview because of how I screwed up and I messed something up. And it feels bad, but it's like that not being able to say goodbye, like at least it's not a death, which now, I never met this person who I'm going to the memorial of, but it's like, make sure you are living every day with the messages that you have for the people around you, because you never know when you're not going to be able to make that, message. Like for my family, we're the most blessed family ever. My brother Tim was in a car accident where the paramedics didn't even get him out. They left him in the car, and we have video of it because it was it was on Orchard Road, if you know Orchard Road, and a guy hit the median on Orchard Road, flipped his car upside down, and the engine of the other kid's car hit my brother here, right? And so he was in the hospital for 2 months, definitely should have died. My brother Chris was in the same type of car accident where 2 of his friends died. And it's like, the fact that those 2 are still with us amazes me. I was in a car accident on Arapahoe Road where if I hadn't had my seatbelt on, I could be gone. And it's like, there's this level of, first off, live by your best integrity, because the fact that I couldn't say goodbye definitely beats the idea of, me being a liar. And then also make sure that whatever you have to say to people, you say it, because you never know. Like, and there's this freedom you get when you have that, right? At least I feel it, because if you know that tomorrow's not granted, it frees you up to live today like you can. So I don't care that I would be, afraid to call the athletic director because I screwed up and yada, yada. I care that I'm, I'm able to do it because tomorrow's not granted anyway. But it also says, and this is something that I love about my family too, is like, every time I get off the phone with my mom or Wendy or my dad or whoever, it's always, I love you. Like, I hope that everyone kind of has that in some way. It's something that I think has really helped me quite a bit. But so that's the story. Let's see. So that's how I left Grandview. And so wasn't a very, harmonious leaving, but it kind of was what it was. I actually have like so many other notes on it, but I actually kind of just had to write it out. I have no idea if I kind of followed along with kind of what this was, but I guess overall, there's a couple things from the end of the story. One, it was definitely my fault. I noticed that he was dressed and didn't say anything. Two, how the people who were in charge handled the situation doesn't have to do with me. It was only on how I do it now. I do feel a bit of an emptiness because I wasn't able to say goodbye in the way I would have wanted to, but I did, say goodbye. The other thing is, I think having people who were outside of the team manipulate and kind of go over my head to the athletic director and then not allow their son to be in the meeting where we were talking about my interactions with their son was a bit cheap, but it definitely let me know how not to do that to someone in the future, if that makes sense. Because it's definitely kind of a, treat others the way you'd want to be treated kind of thing. Let's see. I think that's kind of it, and I'm kind of like stalling at this point. So we've got first is, and then, just integrity. Like, I may hate the way things ended, but in the same sense, it sure beats being a liar and a cheater. Very much so. And that's kind of the thing that I hope that within those chalk talks and with those, every interaction that I have with the players kind of brings that connotation of is, if you live as your best self, things will kind of work themselves out. And that it's, lacrosse is about creating an environment where players can find themselves as being great people and learn how to interact with others. And that's something that I feel must be instilled at every level as you continue to go, and that it really, did help. And that having that integrity to be honest, even when like when your whole being says, no, run away, like don't do that. If you know something is wrong and you do it, you will feel better about it later because you did the right thing. And this is a thing where, after talking it out, I think I'm going to feel a lot better about it as I think about it in the past. Like Jordan Peterson says, if there's a memory you have after 18 months, and we're right about 18 months, that you are still holding on to something or you haven't processed it completely, I think that it's definitely helped me to do that. But so, yeah, definitely kind of a cool thing. Let's see. So this is the other part about the whole idea about not having the ability to say goodbye at the banquet. I feel that the fact that I was told I would have to resign or be fired after the banquet made me look like a coward who couldn't face the parents and let them know at the banquet the day before, right? So I think I sent the email 2 days after our banquet that I was going to resign, and the banquet is a celebration about that year. And even though it ended horribly, there were still a lot of really good things that happened that year. I definitely felt that not being able to kind of allow people to know in person kind of made me look not like what I would have wanted, but it is what it is. But so, hope you guys enjoyed that. That was definitely, one of the more intense in my head style, YouTube live streams and podcasts. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to, I hope that it was somehow enlightening. Definitely something that was tough for me, so I'm glad to have shared it, and I really like that idea. I really like the idea of the thing that I learned in the classes at Goucher and even at CU when I got in trouble was, even though you might think that what you did, and this is something my dad told me for years, even though you might think that something you did is really, really bad, someone else has had the same scenario. And most people have similar scenarios, and maybe because someone's holding on to something that they can't tell someone and they watch this podcast or they watch this live stream or listen to the podcast, maybe they'll, say it because it's their truth. But so, I think speaking your truth is really the only way to kind of live. But that was a tough thing for me. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember to use code POWLAX on prolacrosse.com and flip goalie. And yeah, you'll get 10% off and it'll help support the channel. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you guys ever have any questions or have any comments for that. Definitely leave them. I love getting them. I get them on all social media. Have a good one. I will catch you guys in the next one. Oh, is it that? Nope. All right, that's not working. Hold on.